Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening and to tell you a bit about one of the UK's largest and probably certainly one of the UK's longest environmental projects, delivering the safe disposal of the UK's nuclear waste. And over the next 40 minutes or so, what I'd like to do is to just give you a high-level overview about what geological disposal is, why do we need it, what's the science and engineering behind it, how will we find a site, and what can we learn from overseas. So geological disposal is based on three key principles. The first one is isolation, essentially putting all of this very hazardous radioactive material well away from the surface environment. And by well away, we're talking about several hundred metres underground in solid rock. I think that's quite a difficult number to get your head round. One of the things I have to do quite often is go up to meetings in Westminster. And when you come out of the underground at Westminster Station, you've got three rather long escalators to get you from the level of the underground back up to the surface. That Westminster Station is one of the deepest on the London Underground. It's about 60 metres. So the distances that we are going could be typically around 10 times that depth. Once we've isolated this waste from the surface environment, then we need to contain it, to keep it there. And to keep it there until most of the radioactive hazard has decayed away naturally. And radioactive decay is an intrinsic property of this waste. The rate at which this decay happens is very well known. It's not influenced by the conditions or the chemistry or the temperature. And eventually, unique to radioactive hazard, this hazard will gradually decay away. Having said that, certainly for some of the materials that we have, the time that it will take for that decay to happen to safe levels is thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And that leads us to that third key principle, which is something that we call passive safety. This system has to look after itself without needing ongoing active management. Quite often I go to meetings in Europe, and one of the things that people often do is to show a picture of Europe in 1900 and Europe today. And you only need to think about the number of boundary changes that there have been, the number of disputes ranging from world wars, and I know that today there have been events going on down in Portsmouth to mark 75th anniversary of D-Day. Perhaps more local conflicts. If a country is at war, then looking after radioactive waste in stores at the surface is probably not the highest priority. And so when we start to think of needing to keep this material safely managed for thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, we do need to have a system that will look after itself. As you can see from the diagram, that a geological disposal facility has two parts. It has a part on the surface, and then which is for managing the waste and transferring it, and then the underground areas underneath. You can see that that underground is split into two main areas, and that which area you put the waste in depends on the level of hazard. Some of the less hazardous material can be stacked in boxes and put in vaults, and you can see those vaults on the right-hand side of the image. Some of the most radioactive material is so radioactive that it generates sufficient heat that heat must be managed during disposal. And that's achieved essentially by spreading the waste out, surrounded by significant volumes of the solid rock, which will help to take that heat away. So you have the surface facility and the underground facility, and obviously the third bit is that there does need to be a way of getting between the two. And that can be via an inclined tunnel, often called a drift, or by a shaft with a lift access. So let's home in on that surface facility. And the surface facility is actually pretty unremarkable. It generally involves just a waste transfer facility. Waste usually arrives, often during the last bit of the journey at least, by rail. It's transferred from its transport carriage into a specialist vehicle for taking it underground. And if you want to get a picture of what that would be like, then it's probably one of the closest analogies would be the Channel Tunnel terminal. The area is about 1 square kilometre, and you can see that there are a number of ancillary buildings to do with administration and staff welfare, car parking, things like that would also be on the site. If you look at that artist impression, you may think that what this needs would be a huge area of greenfield site. But certainly on technical grounds, that need not be the case. And the next slide just gives just a few examples of what the surface facility, where it might be sited. It could be inland. It could be on the coast. It could be in a greenfield area. It could possibly be a reuse of a no longer required former industrial site. If you are working at a coastal location, then it is possible to put the surface facility on the land and have the underground final disposal areas just under the seabed, so within a few kilometres of the shore. And essentially, the basic requirements are that you can have an access to the site for the transport and a way of then reaching the underground environment. Our colleagues in Switzerland, tackling a similar issue, have already chosen their sites, and if you look at their surface facilities, you've got aerial photographs on their websites, and you can actually see the housing right up to the site boundary. Underground, I've already mentioned the two distinct areas with the vaults and the tunnels. And just to get a feel as to how the facility might operate, the next slide just gives a short video that actually shows how the facility might operate. And here you can see a waste container arriving on the transport facility and the transport track, being lifted out to the transport container, and moved onto the dedicated vehicle for taking it underground. In this case, the container goes down a drift When it gets down to the disposal depth, it's removed from the transport container. You can see the lid being removed. And a metal stillage with 4 typical waste drums inside it. Being transported to the vault and put in place. And when a vault has been filled, then the space around the containers would be filled, typically with a concrete or a clay material. And finally, when all the vaults and tunnels were filled, then all of the access ways would be filled and sealed, and the surface infrastructure could then be removed. So that's how it works in practice, but what's the science behind it? And the scientific principles are really quite basic. As with anything that you would wish to protect, you put a number of layers around it, and each of those protective layers is designed to provide a specific function of protecting the radioactive waste. The first of those barriers is the form of the waste itself. Contrary to what you might see on television programmes such as The Simpsons, we are not going to dispose of green slime. Any waste that arrives in a liquid form will be converted to a solid. Some of the highly radioactive liquids that have come from facilities such as the reprocessing plants at Sellafield would be vitrified by setting them in a glass. Some of the materials such as sludges would be mixed into a cement to set them. The waste is then placed inside a durable container. I think many of the times the containers that we often think of are the stainless steel 500 litre drums that you saw on the video. They stand about this high. They look like a rather shiny oil drum or milk churn. You can see here that we have a scale model of them. You can see 4 of those drums fit inside the stillage. That stillage fits inside the transport container. In fact, if you want to actually have a play with that, I will set it off going round. Not all waste arises or can be easily converted into small bits that will fit inside a 500 litre drum. So for some of the bigger waste items, we have other containers like this, bigger opening. They can take larger items. Space around the waste would then be filled, again, most probably with a cement-based material. If you actually were to look at the container here and then the stillage for the 4 drums, you'll see that one thing that they have in common is the lifting facilities. Obviously, when you're operating an industrial facility, you want to have some standardisation so that you're not requiring to stop every time and say, oh, what's coming next and how do I adjust all the equipment to take it? So waste containers. Typically, for the less radioactive waste, you have containers that are a few millimetres thick of a high-grade stainless steel. For the most hazardous waste, where you want to keep it fully contained, certainly until the heat generation is finished, you can be looking at containers that are made of materials such as pure copper. And there are containers already being fabricated that have copper walls approximately 2 centimetres thick. Thick-walled cast iron, some thick stainless steel, and things like nickel alloys are alternatives. So then you have the solid waste in a metal container. And that's placed against one of the most important barriers, which is the final rock. Space in between is filled with a buffer or backfill. That's main function is to protect the container and ensure its longevity. For the heat generating waste, we tend to use a clay-based material. As you'll know, that clay is plastic, and that by filling the gap between the rock and the container with clay, any small rock movements can be absorbed by deformation in the clay, meaning that the container is not affected. And the secret to achieving the safe geological disposal is tailoring your engineered barriers, the solid form of your waste, the choice of your container material, and your buffer and backfill, to complement both the properties of the waste that you have on the inside and the rock that you have on the outside. So what's the urgency? Why do we need to get on with this? Most countries can map their back end of their nuclear cycle on a page. On the left-hand side, you have the sources that generate the radioactive waste. And from the UK, because of our more complex nuclear history, going back to the late 1940s, we've had a number of different designs of nuclear power plants. We've operated until recently a system for reprocessing the fuel that has been used in reactors, primarily in the early days to extract plutonium. We've also used these materials in medicine, industry, defence and research. And all of this would look as though the system is well under control, until we point out that actually we don't have a geological disposal facility at the moment. And as a consequence, any waste which isn't suitable to go to the facility LLWR in the northwest of England is being kept in interim storage. And as we generate more waste, we're needing to build more and more interim stores. And here is the waste. Securely stored at nuclear sites across the country, but safe because those sites are actively managed. The temperature, the humidity in those stores is controlled. There are periodic inspections. Any deterioration in the container means that there would be further monitoring and, if necessary, repackaging. Over timescales of about 100 years, then the stores would need to be at least refurbished, if not completely rebuilt. And if this were to go on indefinitely, in time, you would need to repackage the waste. So we have a technology which can safely manage this waste for the long term. And what we now need is a site where this waste can safely be disposed of. So what's in it for a community? What is the opportunity that comes with the hosting a geological disposal facility? And the main one is the jobs. If you do the basic bottom-up calculation as to, whoops, it's decided to go on its own. See if I can get it to go back again. The bottom-up calculation, how many waste containers are you going to move? How many people does it take to move them? Then you have an average of 600 jobs over a timescale of operation of more than 100 years. Look more broadly, then you have opportunities for the supply chain, for cluster development, for spin-off industries. You get the core to actually bring in a skilled workforce, invest in local training, local skills. There is investment in the local environment, options for better land and water quality, improvements to utilities, options to improve the landscape, and preservation of cultural heritage. So how are we going to go about realising this opportunity? Just before Christmas, in fact the 20th of December, the UK government published its policy as to how a site would be found for a geological disposal facility, setting out a consent-based approach in which we, RWM, Radioactive Waste Management, as the developer, will work in partnership with a local community. The search covers England and Wales. The processes are separate, they're very similar. There are some minor differences in local government structure in Wales. And over the time, we have also produced some supporting documentation. So, how is it going to work? This diagram shows a rather long timescale squeezed into a single page. The activities in green are the ones that we are doing at RWM. The ones at purple are the ones that the community will lead. And then at the bottom, there's these sets of plans and permitting. So the publication of the government policy just before Christmas got us to launch. And the first thing that will happen is that somebody, anybody, with an interest in finding out more, can come and talk to RWM in complete confidence about the opportunity, what the facility might be. And many of those conversations may go no further than that. If it does look as though this is an opportunity which is attractive to a community, then the next stage would be to set up a working group. Once that working group is established, then there is access to money to carry out studies. And there might be an interest to hold meetings to raise awareness. Communities might want to commission studies about actually how could that opportunity work for them. At the stage of a working group, the local government structures, the principal local authorities, need to be informed, they may choose to join in. They may prefer not to. Quite often, that these projects, particularly in the early stages, are led by local business people. They often have a planning on a longer time horizon. Again, some working groups may do further studies and decide this isn't an opportunity for them. But if they would like to continue, the next stage is the setting up of a community partnership. And this is the formal body that will actually deliver the project, including people from the community, including representatives of local government and RWM, very much working together. And at that point, as well as having all the costs covered, government has committed that it will pay £1 million a year into an interested community for local investment. What we will be doing during that stage is actually looking at the various options that are available to us, the various sites, the various different communities, and evaluating them to choose the most promising on a range of criteria. And we expect that that will take, that first stage, is somewhere around 5 years. And you'll notice that actually all of these durations are approximate, and they are deliberately approximate, because the key thing here is to work at the pace with which the community is comfortable. If we're going to work in consensus, we do all need to make sure that everybody is happy with where the project is going. What we then need to do is to investigate the sites in more detail, primarily to check their safety. That usually involves drilling boreholes, and we'd expect work to be going on over a period of 10 to 15 years. We're often asked, why does it take so long? And in many ways, one of the easiest ways of characterising the site, if you knew this was the area that you were interested in, would be to pepper it with an array of boreholes. But that rock is a really important barrier for us. And the reason why this takes so long is that we want to do it very carefully and cautiously, making the minimum intervention. And so we expect it will probably be about 3 cycles of boreholes, getting some information, analysing it, seeing what it tells us, seeing what questions it raises, and then planning the next set of interventions to take us a bit further on. All the way through this process, the community can pull out for any reason at any stage. At the end of the process, we will need to apply for all the licences to construct and operate a nuclear facility, but we will only do that when there has been a firm local test of public support. So you might say, well, where can this be built? Can we go anywhere? There are a number of options. Typically around the world, geological disposal facilities are being constructed in one of three main types of rock. And they all have one common feature, in that they are rocks in which fluids, if present, can only move very slowly. Depending as to where you are in the world, some countries, the choice of rock is limited by the geological environment. Our Scandinavian colleagues in Sweden and Finland have a choice of granite or granite or granite. Here is a piece of granite. I think it actually comes from one of the sites in Sweden. Not quite as pretty as the granites that you sometimes see on your kitchen work surface, but you can still see a very fine-grained structure. You can see tiny crystals visible to the naked eye. One of the other types of rock, really a rather boring rock in many ways, is this clay mudstone, called low-strength sedimentary rock. Feels slightly soapy. These samples are taken from a site in the northeast of France. This particular rock formation is actually called by the French Coluvo-Oxfordian. It extends from the northwest of Switzerland, right across northeastern France, and under the southeastern part of the UK. Save my walking around. This one, probably the prettiest of the three rocks, is rock salt. If you wish to, you could lick it and test it, but by the time you get to number 40 of the room, people in the room, it may not be quite as an attractive a thing to do. One of the things that we all know is that salt does dissolve in water, and so the presence of rock salt is a pretty good sign that you actually haven't got much water there. And there are some salt beds, quite a lot of them offshore in the UK, that may also be possible. And so you may want to know, well, what's the geology like where I live? And to try and provide information on which just to start a conversation, government asked RWM to work with the British Geological Survey to produce what's called, I think rather unfortunately called, National Geological Screening, because it's actually an information provision exercise. And what I and my colleagues have been doing over the last 4 years has been working with the British Geological Survey, compiling descriptions of the geology of the United Kingdom, showing at a regional scale the locations of these potential host rocks, showing other things that may be important for siting, such as the presence of minerals and pre-existing mines. Probably one of the rocks, the areas which wouldn't be suitable for a geological disposal facility, is one which has been subject to extensive deep mining in the past. Because the thing that deep mining does, obviously, is put lots of holes into your important barrier of your rock. All of that information is available on the web, and in addition to the very thick technical reports, one of the things that we've tried to do, which is, I think, a first for RWM, is to produce some more public-facing material, and particularly to supplement the reports with animations and videos. So is the UK alone in this project? One of the things that we say about geological disposal, it's a one per country project. So actually, if we want to talk to anybody else who's doing the same as we are, we have to go abroad. And as you can see from this map, we have a fair number of choices as to where we can go. And one of the really good things about geological disposal is that the international collaboration, right from the early days, has been superb, with implementers, regulators, local communities from different countries actually working together and share experience. And I just wanted to close by doing a very quick tour of some other countries in the world and to talk about their progress. The first one is Finland. Finland is probably going to have the first operating facility for spent fuel. If you were to look at their diagram, it's taken them a long time to get there. Their facility is going to be at Olkiluoto on the southwest coast of Finland. I sit on an international committee with a recently retired technical director from the Finnish waste management organisation, Possible. And he said to me, Finland never intended to be first. Finland isn't a big enough country to be first. But what happened, if you look back in history, is that they set off at the same time as countries like the UK and the USA who have failed. And what they said right at the early stages was, this will take as long as it takes. And we will really put the effort into building confidence. And it has seen the fruits of a real hare and tortoise race. That slow and cautious start has got them to the finish line first, and has informed much of our current thinking around the pace, particularly of those early stages. Let's move not very far away to Sweden. Essentially, move due west across the Baltic and you come to the selected site in Sweden, which is at Forsmark. And the thing that is really interesting here, again, it's a spent fuel facility, technology pretty similar to Finland. It's this photograph at the bottom. It's now looking slightly old, it was taken 10 years ago. This was the photograph taken on the day when they announced their chosen site. The person on the right is a gentleman called Claes Tegerstrom, who was at the time the president of SKB, the Swedish implementer. And the two smiling figures are the mayors of the two communities that were investigated as potentially suitable. The really interesting thing here is that during the site selection, those two communities had come to a deal. And the deal concerned the added investment. They agreed between them that 3/4 of the final investment figure would go to the unsuccessful community to compensate them for the lost opportunity of the sustained investment that the facility could bring. So I think we can learn from that actually, if the communities are involved in the project and can shape it to their advantages, it can be an opportunity that they're very keen to seize. Moving now to France. They also have chosen their site. It's up in the northeast. The sample of rather boring looking clay that is passing around comes from there. But in many ways, the most interesting word there is that just by that circle, you can see the word champagne. And the French chosen site is in one of the main champagne growing areas. And one of their big engagement tasks has been winning the support of that local champagne growing community. Again, there is an investment package available, and if you look at the plan, the cutaway, you can see that there is a white line that sort of stakes down the middle of the diagram. That's actually quite significant. It's a road, but it's also a département boundary between two communities. And if you look at the cutaway, you'll see that in France they're planning surface facilities that actually span that boundary. And that was at the request of the two communities because then they share the investment funding. My final example is from Canada. Canada launched a siting process and began talking to communities in 2009. They had to shut their doors at 21 interested communities because the Waste Management Organisation couldn't cope with any more. And they've been gradually working together with those communities to down select. They've got 5 sites currently under consideration. And so just to close, I'd just like to offer a few suggestions as to how you can help. One of the big challenges that we have is, apart from a nuclear educated community like yourselves, people don't know that there is a need. And if people can actually help us in just raising awareness that there is 60 or 70 years of waste at more than 30 sites around the country, which needs to be permanently managed. To recognise the opportunity that actually hosting a geological disposal facility could bring. And to encourage people to have the debate, just to ask the question, and to work out whether or whether not it would work for them. And if you'd like to read more, you can see that we do have a community website, or you can always just email us with a specific question and we'd be very happy to get back to you. Thank you.